discussions of the greatest stables in wrestling history, you hear the names of the usual suspects: Horsemen, NWO, DX, The Shield, The Core, and so forth. Beneath the din though, you'll sometimes find a smattering of support for a group that was actually quite short-lived: the corporate ministry, and it's a bit puzzling. Is it because the ministry existed during the peak of the Attitude Era, so more people tend to remember them? Or is it because of the group's mashup theme, which was No Chance in Hell fused with foreboding violins and Shane McMahon's mad scientist laugh? Whatever it is that spurs nostalgia for the ministry, the formation of said ministry should have made Stone Cold Steve Austin proud. So destructive was he as an anti-hero that a demonic church partnered up with white-collar clods attempting to use their collective powers to bring him to his knees. I mean, we all know that many executives are inherently evil, but how often do they openly embrace unvarnished evil in public like that? You have to admire their honesty at least. In all, 13 individuals populated the corporate ministry, the most insidious merger this side of AOL Time Warner, though only one of those mergers actually altered the landscape of professional wrestling. But in any event, here is where the ministry members all ended up. Mason Ryan, Stevie Ray, Earthquake, Alundra Blaze, Norman Smiley, Zach Gowen, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ahmed Johnson, Tory Wilson, Buff Bagwell, Robert Gibson, Dave Taylor, Terry Taylor, and Godfather's Holmes. Dwayne Gill, Adam Bomb, Michael Hayes, Cor Von, S.A. Rios, Jim Manai, the manager from Kai and Tai, Jim Powers, Francine, Jack Swagger, Mean Gene, Fat Chick Thriller, Duke the Dumpster, Oklahoma Manta. What happened to that wrestler? Some were main eventing, which leaves me lamenting. What happened to that wrestler? Some since long forgotten, but their memories live on. The Mean Street Posse. Little Mac needed a glass Joe, Mario had his array of Goombas, and those who opposed the corporate ministry needed some entry-level foot soldiers to dispatch. Enter Rodney and Peter Gass, the Mean Street Posse, genuine childhood chums of Shane McMahon. Rodney was the thinner member of the original duo, complete with a lemon-coloured mane of blonde hair that was much more vivid than any sweater vest he wore. Gass, meanwhile, was the heftier half of the Posse, albeit seemed to have better prospects as an actual wrestler. The two had only entered the WWF fold a month or two before the merger, where they were cast as Shane McMahon's hapless flunkies. Nothing changed after the pair joined the ministry, as they lost to the likes of Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe, and were generally laid to waste quickly as Shane McMahon's first line of inadequate defense. By the time the group ended, they, along with group ringer Joey Abs, were assisting Shane in his rivalry with Test. Today, Rodney Lionheart is long retired from the ring and operates a landscaping business in Glen Ridge, New Jersey. Pete Gasparino, meanwhile, had a little more wrestling involvement post-retirement. In addition to writing memoirs on his experiences as a late-starting wrestler, he also made appearances on Edge and Christian's WWE Network program. Gasparino also works as a sales consultant for WB Mason in Jacksonville, Florida. Paul Bearer. Bearer's reunion with The Undertaker in this general time period feels like a woefully understated rekindling of a legendary double act. That said, it was cool to see Bearer with the hair dyed black once more, looking somewhat like the Bearer of old, albeit with more of a bouffant hairstyle than the more flattened out Gomez Adams style we recall the most. While it was cool to see Bearer with Undertaker again, admittedly, it didn't fit as well on this go-round, as Taker now did most of the talking, a reversal from how their act worked in the first half of the 90s. And you know what? When you're mostly silencing a man that cut those wickedly awesome "You're a Murderer" promos from a year earlier, you're really doing a disservice. Sadly, William Moody passed away from a heart attack in March 2013. The legendary manager was 58. Viscera. It's a story as old as time. Guy beats up Metalhead to steal his spot in the Royal Rumble. Guy enters Royal Rumble. Guy gets abducted by Satanic Cult on live TV while the non-union cameramen do nothing. Guy commemorates his new state of demonic possession by wearing contact lenses and a leather trench coat that could cover farm equipment. Though this chapter of his life in many ways mirrors the works of Lovecraft before us, we must concede that Viscera's descent into darkness had more soul to it. Although he more than filled the role of a towering heavy under the ministry spell, the former Mabel didn't exactly stand out in the role and was more or less just a giant roadblock that many babyfaces inevitably overcame. Tragically, Nelson Frazier Jr. passed away in February of 2014 from a heart attack at the age of 43. Midian. The former Phineas Godwin was in the same boat as Viscera, in terms of being a heavyweight pawn in the overall game of Ministry chess. But while Viscera was more interested in adorning his own eyes with bluish-grey contacts, Midian preferred his eyeballs detached, based on the fact he toted around a little jar with what one assumed was a human peeper inside. So there you have it, Midian single-handedly inspired Kane's MO in the movie See No Evil. Where are this man's goddamn royalties at? Midian also got to pretend to be European champion through the silent absconding of Shane McMahon's title belt during this time. I mean, I guess that's almost as cool as carrying around a human eyeball, maybe? Now a chef by trade, Midian opened his own catering business in Clearwater, Florida. Farooq. Of all the things one could do with a DeLorean. Personally, I'd like to go back to a WCW locker room in the summer of '92 where, after complimenting most of the guys on their Zubas, I would have told world champion Ron Simmons that in about 6 or 7 years, he's going to be playing a henchman for a B-movie horror cult. I can only assume that after an eternity of staring at me like I was bleeding toothpaste from my ears, he might have bellowed a certain one-syllable swear. Or just beaten me senseless, whichever. Before long, Farooq would be in the role he was born to play. A card-playing mercenary that beat people senseless, either because he was paid or because they beat his two-pair with a straight. Now in his 60s, Simmons is signed with WWE as part of their Legends program and still makes guest appearances. Bradshaw. When Bradshaw began teaming up with Farooq at the end of 1998, it seemed like the soldering together of two adrift brawlers in a last-ditch effort to find some use for them. Few would have ever guessed that a couple of generations of fans would come to regularly identify one with the other, as their tenures as henchmen the Acolytes and the colourfully enterprising APA gave each man a new life. Their tag title win over Kane and X-Pac in May of 1999 marked each man's first belt with the company. The transformation of Bradshaw from aimless cowboy to upper mid-card arse kicker was a bit surprising, but not as surprising as the upgrade that Bradshaw received 5 years later when he had the run of his life as WWE champion. While still an occasional commentator for WWE, Bradshaw is the senior vice president of Northeast Securities, as well as a financial commentator on several Fox News programs. The Big Bossman. Certainly you can't have an empire of evil without incorporating the Big Bossman, whose 1999 included animal abuse, desecration of grave remains, and wonton briefcase raising. But you know what? Credit where it's due. After The Undertaker hanged him before a massive WrestleMania audience, Bossman was cool enough to hug out his issues with the Lord of Darkness and team with the Man later. Presumably Undertaker was like, sorry about that whole ritual sacrifice thing, and Bossman was all, that's okay, I wasn't even selling it an hour later. Bossman went on to serve the corporate ministry in a great capacity by preventing Stone Cold from winning all of the company ownership shares at the 1999 King of the Ring, which the company did a pretty lousy job of explaining. Sadly, veteran wrestler Ray Traylor died in September of 2004 of a heart attack at age 41. China. You have to hand it to China. In an era of swerves, constant heel and face turns, and double crosses out the wazoo, China managed to turn face and turn heel in the same night at WrestleMania 15 within an hour of each other. Previously a surprise defection to the corporation, China turned face just long enough to aid estranged partner Triple H, only to turn heel with him in a double cross of X-Pac 2 matches later. Together they were proud members of this doomsday conglomerate, which is pretty far removed from the tenets of DX. Given their character motivations, the two seemed like an odd fit for the group, but no matter as the ministry died out in the summer, leaving China and Triple H to pursue singles gold. Tragically, Joni Laura passed away from an accidental drug overdose in April 2016 at the age of 46. Triple H. It's hard to imagine Triple H playing second banana in any group, especially after aggressively assuming the controls of DX following WrestleMania 14, which is why the corporate ministry is doubly weird in hindsight. The idea that Triple H, months before capturing the WWF Championship that seemed to be his destiny no matter what, would bow in implied servitude before one or more supreme leaders is as surreal as any devilish rituals carried out by The Undertaker and his followers. But yes, despite not being in the leadership tier, Triple H still acted like a top guy, feuding with The Rock throughout the stable's lifetime and transitioning toward being the company's top heel as the ministry crumbled. Paul Levesque remains a busy man in wrestling today, serving as Executive Vice President of Global Talent Strategy and Development for WWE and acting as NXT's senior producer. Shane McMahon. Who would have ever guessed that one of the breakout stars of pro wrestling in the final year of the 20th century would be Vince McMahon's exuberant son? A solid European title match at WrestleMania 15 against X-Pac and an overachieving street fight with Test at that year's SummerSlam had Shane positioned as an unlikely fan favourite, a debonair businessman with a flair for danger and the willingness to sacrifice his own body to achieve victory. Little did we know that our starry-eyed appreciation for Shane was actually enabling him to overstep his bounds, becoming WWE's best in the world for 2018, in spite of the fact that just cracking his knuckles causes him to sweat profusely. Though not presently an on-air character, Shane O'Mac is still a minority owner of WWE and is executive vice chairman of Ideanomics, a New York-based digitalization service. The Undertaker. Reportedly, the ministry period is Mark Calloway's least favourite run as a professional wrestler, and it's not hard to understand why. I mean, the American Badass run gets maligned by many, but would you rather burn cross-like symbols on a billionaire's front lawn, or wear snakeskin pants to celebrate your 10th anniversary in the WWF? Yeah, exactly. While Undertaker may not have enjoyed his run as the Lord of Darkness, he still carried on with the hangings and kidnappings because he's a professional, and that is what professionals do. During the ministry era, The Undertaker netted one of his many world title reigns, holding the WWF title for 5 weeks before losing it back to Stone Cold in what still rates as the highest rated match in Raw history. The 55-year-old Calloway is under WWE contract for many years to come and recently featured in a WWE Network documentary about the last few years of his life and career. Vince McMahon. It's me, Austin! With those 3 words, a once intriguing angle strapped on some water skis and proceeded to jump a shark, Shark Boy, John Tenta as the Shark, a taping of the TV show Shark Tank, Barry the Shark, a billboard promoting the cartoon Street Sharks, and a building hosting a convention of loan sharks before crashing with a thud in the middle of a street. The reveal of Vince McMahon as the higher power was a wildly disappointing payoff to an angle that had played out for several weeks. So yes, it was Austin McMahon round 2, without the freshness of their 1998 animosity. Such is life when you try to rekindle what worked in the past, something all wrestling promoters have been guilty of. And speaking of trying to rekindle what worked in the past, McMahon is still the lead showrunner of all WWE programs today, as well as the company's chairman and CEO.